Hello and welcome to the Glamptuary Podcast, where we talk about the experiential outdoor hospitality industry and glamping. I'm your host, Bobby Marsden. We are excited to bring you the season finale of Season 2 of the Glamptuary Podcast. If it's your first time here, welcome. If you've been following along, then you've been following both Jesse and Etienne's journey as they both work towards opening up their glamptuaries for the very first time this summer. Hint, hint, they both succeeded. And you know what? We thought, let's get everyone together and celebrate that success. Plus, we're going to talk about what we all think of the future of the travel industry and how these glamptuaries could be impactful and be a positive part of that. So without further ado, let's dive into the season finale of Season 2 of the Glamptuary Podcast with Etienne White and Jesse Roesler. Jesse and Etienne, together at last.
Amazing, right? So nice to meet you. Well, virtually, at least.
It's great to meet you. I'm excited to be in conversation with you, like real time, and ask you some questions.
We've got a lot in common, I think. Yeah, shared experiences to chew on for sure.
Well, this is exciting for me, obviously, for many reasons. It's been a joy to be speaking with you both individually, and obviously for me, I'm also experiencing them both. And so I was really excited just to be able to get you guys together so we can kind of have this wrap up, if you will, or sitting around a campfire, just having a casual conversation about what you've accomplished, which is amazing, by the way. So congratulations to both of you for what you pulled off, both on different timelines, but very similar situations. You're both in Wisconsin. You both have backgrounds in advertising. You both are still working in those professions. You both have children. That's so much the balance, and you guys have been able to manage to do so much. And I can only imagine how difficult it was to manage all of that. What's that like for you guys? I mean, now that you've been open, you've had guests coming in, you're starting to see what that workflow is all about. You still have all those other things going on. I'd love to start off with just how has that been for you guys, keeping all those plates spinning?
Well, I could start it's prioritization and then delegating, which I've learned to do owning a business, in video production, film and television. Like that's something I've learned over time is like, okay, let's make a list. And then which of these things can you bring in help and delegate and, priorities and where do those things overlap? I mean, there are things that from the film work bleed into the property work and bringing our kids. We love bringing our kids out to the property and fishing or biking. So everything sort of overlaps with each other. But I think in terms of getting the things done and moving the things forward, looking at where can I add the most value? What are things that I can have someone help out with? Like on a production, we have people that, help get us the permits we need or the things that we're doing there. So I've had a wonderful person helping me with, coordinating logistics. Her name is Anne. And I think that's been a huge help to me. And then looking at what can I do? What can Jen do? What are the things we want to experience there with our kids and just finding that harmony. And it certainly takes time. You don't make all the right choices out of the gate, but I think it's just, a lot of it's just learning over time and then prioritizing what you want to tackle and what you can't, or what might you delay until next season, that sort of thing.
Etienne, how about you? You're on a farm, so there's a few things you're taking care of that Jesse doesn't have, like lamb and sheep, for instance. So how was it for you when you were getting involved in this? It was the idea phase and it kind of came to fruition. Then you really had to put the gas pedal down and go pretty quickly while you still were managing your children and your other profession. Yeah. How was that experience for you?
Yeah, actually it worked out. I mean, okay, I'm still here. Everyone's here and it happened. So I think it worked out all right. It was actually sort of fortunate on the one hand that the winter, you couldn't, when I found out that I'd been awarded the grant, I couldn't just literally hit the ground running or break ground, as it were, because we had the winter. And so that gave me a lot of time to go back and forth on the zoning, planning, permits, really understanding all the paperwork. And I actually had a friend who helped me with all of that too. And so we would get together in the winter, and kind of push through all that. And then actually, I wish that I could have started building sooner than I did, but it worked out okay in the sense that it was the summer holidays or summer vacation, as you would say here. So the children didn't have school. And so we had a lot going on here, but I had the children around me. And so I wasn't kind of running back and forth and trying to do after school activities or any of that. The downside is, I would say, if you were to ask my children, they say this has been the most boring summer they've ever had. And so there were some days where it was like, I have nothing to occupy you with, but there's 34 acres here. Like, go out and find something because I'm so busy. And then, as I've said before, there were days where, I'd be getting up at 5 a.m. to get an extra coat of paint on before the contractors came at 8, or staying up late at night. And likewise, if during the day I'd had to work on, the OMG Airbnb project, I would maybe stay up late at night and be doing my consulting work, my laptop work when the kids were in bed. So there was a lot to juggle in that sense. But I'm also really glad that there was a timeline on it. I think, if I hadn't had the sort of pressure of there's a deadline, and I spoke in the last one about how a few weeks late on that deadline, but there were no penalties associated with it, thankfully. Thank you, Airbnb. But I think having that time pressure of like, you have to be open by such a time was a good thing. And then lastly, I think that so much of having a life in balance is knowing what to say no to. And so even though I love hosting people out at the farm, because it is our personal home and because I do have responsibilities during the week, it is only open on the weekends right now. And next summer, might that change? Sure, it might change. But for right now, I only have it open on the weekends because that's the only time I can really welcome people here, show them a tour of the farm, and not have, a million other kind of balls that I'm juggling, if you will. And I know it's different for you, Jesse, because yours is very kind of self-contained. And I'm the same with my Airbnb cottage that I have in a village, a half hour away. That's open all week long. You can book it for a week. You can book it for a month. But this right now is just on weekends only. And that's another way that I'm able to get balance. And so I think, we're, especially women, we're kind of sold this dream of you can have it all. And we have these, Pinterest perfect lives or Instagram perfect lives. And I just think it's a fallacy. And so you have to say no to something. So I'm saying no to midweek guests in the cheese cabin. And that's one of the big decisions I've had to make that I think allows me to have balance now.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And you both, as I just mentioned, and you've talked about, you have other professions and sources of income, and that these glamping operations are not your prime drivers. So I think it does probably offer you the opportunity to be choosy when you want to engage in that experience. Do you ever envision perhaps transitioning all the way into glamping, or is that something that you really just need to get your feet wet a little bit more and decide if that's really the direction you want to choose, or perhaps maybe this is the balance that you might continue with?
That's a great question. I definitely know that, kind of in my heart, and we talked about this in earlier episodes, I want this farm to be something I can offer more people. And I think being out in nature is a sort of a human right, if you will, and more people should be able to do it more often than they are right now. And also more people should know about how their food is being raised and what regenerative agriculture looks like. So I feel really passionately about that, and definitely want to get more kind of glamp sites if I can here. And then ultimately, as I've said before, maybe even host, executive retreats here. And so this is definitely something that right now, this is just the beginning, and I'm sort of easing into it. It's also, honestly, we're recording this in August. The season will come to an end quite quickly here. The weather will shut us down. And so it's just a really nice way to kind of dip our toes into the water. And then we'll spend another winter, just like we were planning and plotting and working things out last winter. We'll do that this coming winter too, and say, what is the plan? If we want to make this bigger, what could that look like? And what's the timing associated with it?
And Jesse, obviously you and I have worked together in the past, and I know how passionate you are about filmmaking. And personally, I don't ever see you never not being a filmmaker. But you also mentioned that you have help, another person that's really helping manage part of the operation. Do you feel like you've kind of kicked something off, and that might be something, as you mentioned, delegating, handing that off and having it be kind of a full-time thing where you're just managing from afar? Or, and please don't ever say you're not going to stop making films, but would you just stop making films and just run a Glamptuary the rest of your life?
No, I think your instinct is right. I don't ever want to stop making films, but I could envision a time where it's like, I just want to make this one project this year, because the revenue pressure isn't there, So I don't think it'll ever be like a switch that I flip, but I've loved just going out to the property once a week, making some firewood, making some kindling, listening to the birds. Like, it's a good excuse for me to be outside in a place that I love. And honestly, just the notes from people that we've gotten, in our first half dozen or so stays have been like really meaningful. Like it's doing what we hoped, and that's really cool. Like I think, in our film and TV work, like I love our product too, but it's a different kind of rewarding what we've started here. But I love them in concert, and I'm hoping that I can, keep doing the film and TV work and maybe just split the time a little bit more. So I'm spending a little bit of time on hospitality at the Outpost, and then, still the majority of the time on film and TV. But over time too, I'd love to, do more with events where we have, an all day birding, foraging, plant and nature walks, and then a big meal, or things that would require a bit more time and effort that I just can't quite swing right now, given the level, the volume of work we're doing production wise. But I think over time, I don't want to be a road warrior forever like I am in production. So sticking closer to home, that would make that possible. So I think it is sort of a like retirement career look down the road too. But I think it'll just be, it won't be like all or one at one time. It'll be like maybe a gradual move into that.
Yeah. And obviously there's probably a ton of content that you can capture with an event that you might have on your property, or just in general, just nature happening all over the 18 acres. I'm sure it's endless as to what you can photograph or what you can video. Another thing that was always kind of forefront in my head, especially in talking to you, Jesse, is that you do so many of these documentaries where you're me. You're on the other side of the camera asking the questions. Yeah. What was this process like for you, being the person that's getting asked the questions, and that's being on the other side of that whole entire process, and while you were actually living it? So it wasn't like a recount of this is what happened. You're in the middle of it. So some of it, you have no idea what's going to happen yet. It can be exciting, terrifying, both. What was that like?
You're my property therapist. You're my build therapist. Like I get work through what was happening in real time with you, like, oh, Bob, you'll never guess what happened, this time. The county says we have to do this. Like, yeah, you're like the person I process it with my partner, Jen, and with Anne. But it's been great to just, both talk to you and then listen into what Etienne, what you're dealing with. And there's parallels, both in our values for why we're doing this, but also some of the hurdles or challenges we've had to overcome too. So it's been fun to process that and like see what someone else is happening in their journey too.
And Etienne, obviously, as we just mentioned, you were on a really accelerated timeline. So we were really like, I wonder if what's going to happen next week. I wonder if the A-frame's going to go up. I wonder if what was this like for you? Because you always come across so calm and cool and collected.
It was a mix. So definitely, I think I've said before, overall for the process, I was losing sleep and it was very stressful and I really wanted to meet that deadline. But in terms of recording the podcast with you, I never really had any issue with it. It was, well, if I'm failing, I'll fail publicly. That's okay, because that's life, right? And if we're doing this to be of value, then we want other people to see they can learn from our mistakes, so they can see where we got tripped up, and plan, to kind of detour around those things. So I never felt any trepidation about coming on here and saying, we don't know if it's going to be okay, or it wasn't okay, or yay, it was okay. Just to kind of report transparently along the way actually felt good. It felt realistic. Yeah.
That's awesome. And speaking of learning, I know a lot of people have contacted me and said that through watching you guys and on your journey, they've learned so much about what it entails. And honestly, we probably were just scratching the surface. There's so much more that we didn't have a chance to talk about. What was a big learning for you, Etienne, in this process of what you kind of thought would happen, and then maybe something that just came out of nowhere?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, one of the big takeaways that I haven't talked about before, one that I have talked about before was the planning and the permitting and the zoning and the paperwork and all of that. I really didn't know what I would be in for with that. But one of the other big takeaways that I haven't talked about is just how expensive everything is. I would, maybe I would find, like I found an apron sink that was, really cheap on a good deal, or I would find, doors on Facebook Marketplace or at the local reuse center. And sometimes the savings you're getting by getting something on sale or that's slightly kind of off the wall, you're spending that and more as contractors scratch their heads and try and make that work or fit that into something. And so I really didn't realize I'd kind of done a tally of all the things I would need to buy, but I really didn't realize, like, just in terms of man hours and labor. And of course, people should be well compensated for what they're doing. And, I'd encourage more people. I wish there were more people going into the trades and that we made that seem like a more aspirational kind of path, that you shouldn't have to go to college. You should be able to be in the trades. But I really just hadn't anticipated how much everything costs. So that was a big kind of shock to me.
Jesse, how about you? I know that you put a lot of attention into some portions of your property that were very specific on detail, and you couldn't just, go down to the local supermarket and pick up, the hot tub or the sauna. There were some specifics. Was there anything for you that kind of jumped out, whether it's cost-wise or process-wise, that was kind of eye-opening?
Yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing theme in my life, both professional and personal, that things take longer than I think. And this was no exception, and probably more so to the degree. And also cost, like the same thing. Like I had some idea. I mean, we've done some minimal home remodels in the past. So like I knew some of those costs, but like putting in a septic or a well or a driveway is significant. And so, I'm looking at this property as very much a long-term investment, both on how we use it, but also like we expect to have it in our family for a long, long time too. So I'm also looking at 20, 30 years from now, would we want that? Yes. Okay. Then it's okay to do it now too. And so I'm taking that long view. And I think that's helped with absorbing okay, it's okay that it's costing this much or taking this much now. But yeah, that's definitely been a learning. I think one of the other things is what we had talked about before, Bobby, in terms of there's the county process of permitting for things. Sometimes the county's not totally sure and they check in with the state, and we got different answers from different people on something, and it recently just reversed again. So it's, I guess, what I learned from that is to keep pushing and doing your own research and contacting people on your own, because ultimately, we found an engineer that said, actually, this code says this, county. And they're like, oh, okay, here's your permit. So it's not just black or white, just like anything else, your due diligence can significantly pay off. So it's worth doing it.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice. And I think that's a healthy way to approach anything that you're going to view, like you just mentioned, as a long-term investment. Is at the short-sighted side of things, it can seem like a lot. But if you actually extrapolate out what that cost is per day over 30 years, all of a sudden it becomes like a couple pennies a day. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a different way to frame it up. Well, obviously I wanted to get you guys together to have a conversation, and I've asked a lot of questions throughout the entire podcast, and you guys have been amazing at answering them, and I appreciate it. Is there any questions that you guys have for each other? Because you both watched each other's journey. And again, I think we scratched the surface on many things, but I also know, just in talking with you and seeing the industry and seeing how people have put their glamping resorts up, there's so much that goes into it. Is there anything that you guys want to ask each other? Be it about Wisconsin, be it about your properties. Etienne, I know you had some questions for Jesse. What would you like to ask?
I do. This one, it sounds like it's in the small points department, but it was such a big deal to me. And it was so hard to get my head around. So my driveway, I had to widen my driveway. And then in certain places, I actually had to reroute it in order to widen it, because we had things like streams or, a kind of sheer rock face. And so we had to kind of reroute it. And so I spent a lot of money. I was hoping originally that I would have 2 or 3 cabins, and I have just 1, because the rest of the cabin money is now lying as gravel on my driveway. And so did you have to do, what were the specs you had to follow for your driveway? Is it 20 foot wide? And did you have to have pullovers for pull-off areas for emergency vehicles? How kind of compliant did you have to be with your driveway?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, so when we got the permit for the driveway, mostly it had to do with culverts, and because there's some some lower lands where water would flow into the lake that we're on. So that was something that I didn't anticipate, that we had to figure out exactly where those needed to be. And then the town of Sampson, the town commissioner, there are government positions that I wasn't aware of, that oh, you got to call him. And this is his, home phone because he's a volunteer in this, right? So I'd be like, call him and when can we come out and look at it? So that was something. And then also just like, if you're going to gravel, like what's the amount? Because like if you want to be passable in the wet season, right? It's like, if you don't have gravel, you're not getting down that road when either the snow is melting or, after big rain. So I think those things like figuring out the culvert situation and the gravel were the big things for me, and that added the most to the cost too. So that was interesting. But ultimately I think I'm glad we did it, and I definitely taking that long view, because it is probably the most significant investment outside of obviously the land itself, and then the cabin. Like that was more than the septic, that was more than the well, that was more than everything else. But I think it'll serve us well and allow that if we do want to put another cabin or something, we'll already have that there. So once you start adding more of those, the cost per unit goes down significantly too, and that's something I had heard elsewhere too.
Yeah, that's great insights. I suppose so much up front is the infrastructure, which you can then kind of build on. I love that you gave a little shout out there, and I feel like I should give a shout out too to everyone who's working at that town and township level on a volunteer basis that's helping folks like us navigate it, because there really isn't a rule book, the kind of zoning, planning, and then even right down to we had the same guy who's, not the same guy, but same situation. He's a volunteer, calling him on his cell phone, getting him at home. He's coming off to work to look at the driveway and scope it out with me and work out how we can do it. And, all that time is free. They're not getting paid for that. And so they do a marvelous job of helping us kind of have flexibility within a framework, I think, wanting to enable us and empower us, but also obviously we need to follow the rules. And so shout out to everyone who does that job. It's not an easy job.
Yeah, I can only imagine the kind of questions that people at that level get.
Yeah.
from people that have no idea, and they're just starting out asking very, introductory questions, to perhaps people that have been doing it for years that are very experienced on maybe rewriting ordinances, and they're going to start to attack it that way. So yeah, and I think there's probably a lot of work that needs to be done there too with this growing sector of business, because it is new and often misunderstood. And I think at the end, I know you've mentioned it, Jesse, I think you've mentioned it as well, that some of the things that are written in place for as far as permitting and ordinances are kind of archaic, and they don't necessarily apply to what people are trying to do now. What are your thoughts kind of in general with where the business is and what you feel travel is becoming?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think obviously COVID reframed what travel is for a lot of people, but not just in the fact of like, you don't have to go so far, but I mean, if you are staying close to home, how do you make that experience feel really novel? And it's funny, I was just talking to a guest on our Open Air Humans podcast last week about this. It's like, once you learn more about like the plant ecology, the flora that is in a place, it makes any kind of travel different, because you're looking closer, and it can make, he was talking about like the first time he went out and picked wild blueberries, and he was like, I was in a completely different landscape. It was like I had traveled to some, far off land, yet it was just an hour outside of where I live. So I think you can look closer and have a deeper, more meaningful connection without going as far in a lot of ways. And I think we want to hopefully be a place where people can lean into that. If they do want to, you can either go and just relax and restore, or if you want to go learn something, you can do that and have an experience that maybe you didn't know you could have so close to home. For people that are coming from, an urban area, not far away, it can seem like a really different, novel landscape if you take the time to look closer and just get to know it better.
Yeah, and at the end, we've mentioned and we've talked about your sustainability practice, professional life, and trying to fuse that into now what you're able to offer on the farm, and what that could lead to as far as bringing more people together to have these conversations happen on a broader schedule. What are your thoughts on kind of the travel industry, how it could be impactful that way as an educational tool, and how you could be a part of that?
Yeah, I think that bioregional economies, bioregional travel and tourism, I think things happening at a more local and regional level is a trend that we will continue to see. Everyone has seen, this summer, for example, fantastic holiday destinations in flames, Rhodes, Greece, Hawaii. And I think people are really starting to realize that there is a responsibility that they have with choosing where they fly and when they fly. And I think also COVID, to Jesse's point, was a great reframe, because even though we couldn't, travel very far, people had fantastic holidays together. And I have an Airbnb, as I said, in a village nearby, and we would get the family where the grown brother is in Minneapolis and the grown sister is in Chicago, or maybe someone's in Milwaukee, and they would all come together and rent the house with their kids for a week. And they were leaving, my guest book, that this was like the best vacation they'd had. And it was because they had that quality time together. And maybe those families wouldn't have all vacationed together. Maybe they would have gone on planes at separate times for their, week in Mexico or whatever. And so I think that the climate crisis will force us to travel more locally. But I also truly believe that the sense of community and belonging that we get from being connected at that bioregional, more local level is a reward in and of itself that will encourage and kind of beget more growth in that area too.
Speaking of connectivity, how do people get connected with the both of you? Jesse, what are the social channels? What's the website? How can people come and stay with you?
Sure. Yeah, easiest is openairOutpost.com. The only social channel we've ventured into is Instagram. I'm at that age where I find like more than one social channel to be overwhelming. Like friends like, you should get on TikTok. I'm like, I can't do it. I'm 41. I can't start a new one at this point. I'm like one and done. So yeah, we're on Instagram. Otherwise, openairOutpost.com.
Cool. At the end, now yours is a different story, obviously, because it was an Airbnb contest. So where can people access the idyllic cheese cabin?
Yeah. And so this only exists because of Airbnb. And so one of the kind of rules of the contest, which I completely understand and agree with, is that it can only be listed on Airbnb for the first year. I was already working with Airbnb for my other property. So if you look under OMG, the OMG section, you can find I'm the only cheese wedge that you can stay in anywhere in the world on Airbnb. And so pretty easy to find there. If you want to find me personally for any of the sustainability related things that you might want to pick up on and be in conversation on, really the best social media that I'm on the most, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but is LinkedIn. And so you can find me as Etienne White on LinkedIn. And I am sporadically on Instagram too, under Hearts on Farm.
Cool. Well, I want to, again, extend a huge thank you to both of you for participating in season 2. I think it was a huge success. I had a ton of fun talking to you guys, and I learned a lot, and I think other people did as well.
Thanks, Bobby. Thanks for bringing us all together, and for you asked such great questions all the way through and gave such good encouragement too. So it's been a lovely experience. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been wonderful, Bobby. Thanks for being the sounding board and sharing these 2 journeys as they unfolded. Pretty cool.
I appreciate it, guys. It was 100% my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'd like to thank Jesse and Etienne one more time for their time and participation in season 2 of the Glamptuary Podcast. And I'd like to offer them a big congratulations for getting their Glamptuaries open. I can't wait to visit them both. And I'd also like to thank all of you, the listeners, the followers, the watchers, everyone that participated in the Glamptuary Podcast. Can't thank you enough, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you'd like to follow along on the Glamptuary Podcast, we'll be launching season 3 in the fall, and you can do so on our website, which is www.glamptuary.com. Again, that is www.glamptuary.com. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Pandora, YouTube. We don't care where you follow us. We just ask that you follow. So until we see each other again, be well, and we'll see you in season 3.